this is my license plate. That's what I do. So, not to be confused with this one. That's also somewhere here in the Bay Area. Yeah, yes. That's great. Finally got to meet you. Talk to me afterwards. That's great, that's great. So, yeah, so, there. So I work at Kaazing. Kaazing specializes in WebSocket technology. I'll just touch on that a little bit later today. This is mostly an overview of all of HTML5, and that just makes up one small part of it. Kaazing, we also do HTML5 training, and we have a little booth out there. If you're interested in more information, just come and see us. I also, about a year and a half ago, started the HTML5, the San Francisco HTML5 user group. How many of you are members of the San Francisco HTML5 user group? Okay. Okay, not enough. If you're from this area, definitely check us out. It's sfhtml5.org. It's a meetup. We have great events that's all free. We have some of the top speakers. All of the events are videotaped. For example, this week we have Farouk Atesh, who created Modernizer. We have about, I think, 300 people on the list for that event. So really great events, all free. Kaazing provides the pizza, and definitely check us out. So I have a little bit of a dilemma for this talk, in that last year, about a year and a half ago, I did sort of the initial talk for the HTML5 user group in San Francisco. And we had very few members, and the talk lasted about 2.5 hours, then another hour of questions, and then today I was asked to sort of repeat that, and at the time there wasn't a lot of browser support for HTML5, and certainly not as many features as there are today. So today, the user group is up to 2,500 members. We have a lot more feature support. We have incredible browser uptake in the market, and I have 1 hour. So I can either start talking really fast, or I can give you the 100,000-foot overview, which is a little bit even more higher level and more distilled. So if you're interested in any of these items, I'm not going to be able to take a whole lot of questions for this hour, but I'm going to be here for the rest of the day, and I will be at the Kaazing booth, and there's going to be a party after, so I'll be around. So if you have any questions, if there's something really quick, great, and otherwise we'll take the questions after, so to keep moving. All right, so quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So, what is HTML5? I'll give you the 2-minute history and 5 reasons why you might care about HTML5. And then I'll talk to you about the different HTML5 features. I'll talk about, sort of at the high level, all the different feature areas, and then I'll finish it off with sort of what sort of tools do you need today to develop good HTML5 applications? What sort of things should be in your toolbox? And then the Q&A will have however much time we have left then. All right, so what is HTML5? They're asked 3 different people, and you get 3 different answers, and some people are, you can argue about that all day. Ultimately, the way I look at it, I mean, obviously the new major milestone for HTML that was a long time coming, but it's primarily the first name for it was actually Web Applications 1.0. And so there's a lot of application detail in there, and a web application versus a website, that's a whole other discussion that gets pretty, ultimately the files that are used are the same, but a web application has a little bit more, like you're doing something with it as opposed to you're just browsing. And to do those kind of things, you need capabilities that up until recently were only available in desktop applications. And these desktop applications have local storage facilities. They have graphics APIs. They have connectivity, maybe using socket connections or streaming connections. And the browser never had that, but HTML5 defines a whole lot of new APIs and new technologies that will make that work. And if you're if you haven't heard of Newt yet, that's because it didn't really get so popular. That was actually the Newt acronym was coined by Bruce Lawson, who also wrote a book on HTML5. New and exciting web technologies. That's what it stands for. Because in a way, I'm not here telling you that CSS 2 or 3 are part of HTML5. They're separate standards. But the way I like to look at it is like you need HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create a modern web application. Nobody will argue with that. So using them together and putting them under the larger umbrella term of HTML5 is I think, reasonable. Now, modern browsers already have a lot of support for it. And there are some great websites, the first one being HTML5 Test, that basically allows you to quickly run a test in the browser that you're in, that you're accessing the site on. And if you haven't checked this, check it in different browsers and you'll see different scores. And this is the Chrome developer channel, probably the highest score. There's another website that can tell you about, it's called caniuse.com. This site was unfortunately compromised over the weekend, but it's back up, fortunately. This was kind of lame. So if you want to check, geolocation, okay, well then you see that it's really in all the browsers today. And other features, let's say I'm interested in the, the details element, then I can say, well, that's actually only in Chrome, so that's maybe something that I'm not quite ready to use in my applications, although they're usually good polyfills or emulation products. All right, so I promised the very condensed timeline. I don't want to make a whole history lesson out of this, but HTML 1.0, that was really the early 90s. And the specification, the very first HTML tag specification was only 3 pages long. Then it rapidly evolved into HTML. Version 2 is really the first version that anyone's really used. And that was in like mid-90s, and then moved on. The specification changed to the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, from the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. And that really where the major momentum started building up. And that sort of came to this, like HTML4, the sort of the final big version. Things were really moving along. And that's basically when the W3 started looking at other technologies, like XML-based technologies, XHTML, SVG, all of those technologies started coming up. And that was seen as more the future of the web. And the web became more popular, and things like Web 2.0 and Ajax, and they started doing a lot of new stuff, new applications, but the browsers weren't ready they didn't have any new features for a while. And so plug-in technology started bridging the gap, like Flash and later Silverlight and so on. And a group within the W3C decided to push for improving HTML for web applications specifically. And it came to a vote, and it was voted down, I believe it 15-8, voted against improving HTML to enhance web applications. And that same group that was voted down then promptly the next day started their own working group. It's called the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group, the WHATWG for short. And so they defined Web Applications 1.0. Features were added and everything, like there's a great new, all kinds of new different areas like Canvas for graphics and storage and WebSockets and all of those things. And so HTML5 has that incredible promise. It's a huge step forward. It's been a long time coming, and it fixes a lot of things that people were using other technologies for. And eventually the W3C sort of caught on and said, yeah, okay, we need to specify that. That was kind of a mistake to go that pure XHTML route. And they dropped the work on XHTML, and they defined at the W3C the HTML5 specification as well. So both standards, by the way, are still alive. So HTML5 in the W3C and HTML, the living standard, in the WHAT working group. Now, as much promise as HTML5 has, it's not completely done. So we're completely, there's the working draft last call. There's a lot of features that are already in browsers today, but it's not completely done. And the aim is to have it sort of done in the candidate recommendation phase, 2012. In 2022, this is a date you may have heard about for a proposed recommendation. What that really means, to give you an example of a proposed recommendation that was recently passed, like in this summer, like anyone know what became a proposed recommendation? No, not that bad. Anyone? CSS Level. Yeah. CSS, what number? Yeah. Right. So CSS2. So did you wait till this summer to start using CSS in your application? That's ludicrous, right? So the same for HTML5. You start using it really when the browsers have full support for it, and then once the browsers have picked it up, the candidate recommendation is a good target. Right? All right. So why would you even care about HTML5? Well, first of all, HTML5 solves common problems. It what they call paves the cowpaths. So an example of that is a form, a simple input type in a form. So in HTML4 you have a form, you have an input type, and you have a type of text. There wasn't an email recognition in the HTML4 browsers. So then to figure out that text field is actually an email address, you need to write a whole bunch of JavaScript, like maybe a regular expression like that one that is pretty error prone, or pull in like a jQuery library. Well, doing that has its problems, because if you add a library to your page, that just slowed your page down a lot. And that library's probably got more stuff than you needed in it. So, a pain. Now, HTML5 paves that cowpath and says, okay, we have now an email type. Right? That's it. It's pretty simple. You'd say type equals email. You can even say required. That's it. Now your browser does the validation for you. If you don't enter an email address, it will warn you right out of the box. So we'll talk a little bit more about the form stuff. The other, second reason for that is HTML5 is really, really simple. So one good reason for developing an HTML5 is it actually saves you time. Right? If you compare what you had to do in the previous versions, like the form example is a great one. If I told you, well, write me an email routine, like for this regular expression, you might be here past 5 o'clock. In the type equals email, that's all given to you. So it actually reduces the time that you need to develop applications. So it's simpler, and some examples of that is the doctype. There was every page started with the doctype. It used to be this long, lengthy string. I could never remember it. So I would just copy and paste something. And instead now you have doctype HTML. Notice it doesn't have HTML5, so this will be valid for a long time. Character set. There's a similar kind of, it is a very good example of how HTML sort of just takes all the verbose junk out of it and distills it to what's really needed. The markup, you might find pages. In fact, I got one bad review on my book on Amazon, and the reason for that was my code examples in the book use this simplified, perfectly legit syntax, and basically said, oh, well, you're missing HTML and body and head and so on, and you're not quoting your attributes. Well, I don't have to. In HTML, everything is in a simpler, more relaxed markup. But there is such a thing as valid HTML, but this would be a perfectly valid page in 70 characters, so I can put 2 complete HTML pages in a single tweet. And that, I mean, just a good example of how simple that is. In reality, I'll warn you right now that for today's browser, the applications especially for IE, you probably want to keep some of those body and head and HTML, but it is perfectly fine to use that. The third reason is it's a universal language, right? So even anyone would agree with that, and examples of that are support now in HTML5 for additional East Asian typography, for accessibility, right? It's not just sighted users looking at pages, but everyone should be able to use it. And a great example of that is the recent adoption of web video text tracks, which are WebVTT for short, which is great. You can simply go into your video element, add a track element, point it to a text file, which is called a WebVTT file, and by adding that, browsers that support it, there's not a whole lot of support for it yet, so you may need a polyfill, and we'll come back to that. You would get this sort of like subtitle view in your browser. So there's some really cool stuff coming out for accessibility. Some areas are still lacking, but it's coming along nicely. So a fourth reason is really the plugin-free paradigm of HTML5. So native support for graphics APIs, for socket connections, for audio and video, just native ability to play that makes things a lot simpler, but also you don't rely anymore on a plugin to be installed, right? So plugins, Bruce Lawson, to quote him again, built in is always better than bolt on, right? And that's a great way of also, obviously you need to have the feature support, and HTML5 provides that precise, like all the gaps. For one thing, Flash, they certainly had a lot of things right because they filled every single gap that needed to be filled, from video to graphics and sockets and so on. So, but the problem is that may not be installed, right? And you know, pretty soon, in what I'm hearing from about the Metro apps, the plugins won't be allowed. Not exactly sure the details there, but just like the iPad, right? There's no Flash on the iPad. Whenever a really good example was in the WebSocket protocol, a proxy poisoning attack was discovered. Like it was possible to exploit this issue in WebSockets. And the reason why they thought about that was because they knew that it existed in Flash and Java, had never been fixed. And then about 6 months after it was discovered in a sort of a theoretical lab, it was fixed. The current protocol versions don't have that vulnerability anymore. So it's really a great testament to how fast HTML5 can really move things along with the incredible momentum it has right now. And so Steve Jobs said, you know, whenever a Mac crashes, more often than not, it's because of Flash. So, I mean, just things like that. So. There. Just kidding. It's a Mac. So another reason to use HTML5 actually is security is really built into the core specification. So HTML5 defines a concept of what's called origin-based security. And so every website you browse to has an origin, the scheme, host, port combination you're browsing. So HTTP, www.example.com, and then port 80 or 443. So that combination is your origin. And so if you store things in the browser, you will get it stored in a sort of like a storage bucket for that origin. So a site on like yahoo.com cannot see inside of that origin's storage area. So it's safe from that angle. There's also a separate specification called cross-origin resource sharing. So it's a common problem that maybe on a website you need to share content, but to do it sort of the wrong way would be using something like JSON-P, where you're actually opening up your site to have scripts run inside of your script, inside of your page. Whereas now there's a new standard called CORS, or cross-origin resource sharing. That's going to be very important to sort of have a server opt in to share resources with other sites. So a sort of a proper mechanism as opposed to a bunch of hacks. So, and finally, it's just cool. Right. Now, let's talk about the HTML5 feature areas. So the feature areas, as they're defined by the W3C, and this can, you know, not everyone agrees with this, right? So you have CSS3, clearly its own specification. Some things that are part of graphics, like SVG, those are not really part of the core specification. But if you group it together in these different areas, this is how you create a modern web application. And so the top half is more of the visual parts, right? So these are the semantic markup, the CSS, the styling of your pages, the multimedia, the audio, video, and the graphics, those really are sort of very much visible on the page. Whereas the bottom half is a lot more invisible. And so one thing definitely about HTML5, you really need JavaScript, like a lot of these things, like Canvas. It's a graphics API, but you need JavaScript to really do something on your page. And a lot of other sessions today, we'll be talking about that, of course. So device access, performance, storage, all of those things are APIs that are exposed to the browser and in your pages that you can use in JavaScript to do really cool things with. So the bottom half is a little bit less visible. All right, so and I'm going to talk through the features in that same order. And so the first thing about the semantic markup, I just wanted to make one sort of quick comment, is that of, you see a lot of sites that have like badges on the bottom of them that say valid XHTML, right? But actually what most people don't know is that XHTML needs to be served with the right MIME type. It needs to be served with the application/XHTML plus XML MIME type, whereas because IE does not support that and would prompt you for a download, it actually, like 95 or plus % of the world XHTML5 pages are served as text HTML, and then the browser, just all it sees is just a tag soup. So it starts to do all of its error handling it can to actually make sense out of those pages. So you marking up XHTML hasn't really solved anything. It's just created more browser error handling code. So HTML5 has there is a valid markup, and there's validators like validator.nu and the W3C site, that there is also an XHTML flavor of that. That's probably not what you would be writing yourself, but maybe a machine would generate that. And it's backward, it supports the XML-based markup, because one of the design goals of HTML5 is that nothing should break. Like the old content should simply continue to work. And that's working quite well. But in general, just look for valid HTML5 as opposed to valid XHTML. Now, HTML5 defines 27 or 28 new HTML5 elements. If you take a look at this list, you'll see some of the audio and video and Canvas. Those are sort of hooks for that other content. But it also defines a lot of new semantic markup, things like section and article and so on. And then there's a few other things too. Now there's also a bunch of removed elements. They're still going to work in most browsers. I mean, they'll be working for a while longer, but they won't result in valid markup, so you should get rid of these. Anyway, these are pretty much like inline styling that should have been done for a long time in CSS anyway. Now, the semantic markup came around after a lot of research was done. Opera did a great study, and Google. They looked what were the most commonly used div IDs and classes. And so if you look at that, the top div ID in the past was footer, and then header, and so on. So people were marking up content on their pages with divs and then gave it a class or an ID to give it some meaning. I was like, if everyone's doing that, why don't we just create a header or a footer element? And that's where all these elements came from. And really, it's a nicer markup, it's simpler to read, and there's many benefits for a developer there. But the real benefit is not the end user here, it's not the developer, it's the machines that are reading your pages, right? It's much easier, since the web is all about linking content together, it's much easier to take an article from a site, and that article is self-contained. You can grab the entire article, suck it into your page without looking for, well, div ID equals, and then you don't know what the content is. You don't know how it's structured. It's a completely unstructured versus a nice, meaningful semantic markup. And so if you look at the page, an HTML5 page, and of course there's no single one page that is an HTML5 page. Just this, an example that you have a header defined at the top. For the top section, you have a navigation or a nav element that contains all the links. an aside section with related content, and then a section that actually spans both articles, and then a section has like related content in it. And within that section, I have 2 articles. And within the bottom article, I can even have a figure element. So all of these new elements give meaning to what you're wrapping, right? So for example, if you look at that, the figure and the figure caption, in the past it was like a paragraph tag and an image. And then maybe there was another paragraph tag below it, and which one of those was actually the text that described the image. As a sighted end user, you might say, oh, of course it's that one, it's the italic paragraph. But as a machine or a screen reader, that's much, much harder to do. So giving that meaning also helps accessibility and helps search engines find your content and so on. So it's good to use that, and you can start using that today. You can use that today. If you do, there's going to be one problem. That's this one, i.e. less than 9 is not going to be very happy with that. And fortunately, there's a great tiny little script that you should, and it's part of the tool set I'll talk about later, that instantly just fixes this. It's a problem with IE not being able to style things, elements that are not yet in its known set of elements. And so this one-liner script quickly fixes that for you, and then your pages will look just like they did normally. So you can really use this markup today. All right, so then to extend that even further, the search engine optimization for the give meaning to your content, there's a separate standard called microdata that allows you to apply attributes to your pages. And to give you an example of it is here, you take a section and you give it an item scope pointing to a data vocabulary. So for example, in this case, product would describe a product of like training, an HTML5 fast track training. Then it has a description and a price and an in stock. All of the things that you would expect from a product can be marked up literally just in line as attributes in your pages. So it's really powerful. Again, not really meant for the end user. They don't see anything of this. But search engines, they can look at this, and there's data vocabularies. Check it out for products, for person, for recipe. You know, all of the kind of structured syntaxes that you might expect. And the next area is the forms. I mentioned that form as a way to pave the cowpaths. And there's all these new form input types. The email is one of them, web address, date, color, all of these new elements that you can use, or these new types that you can use, that the browser has a native understanding of. These features degrade nicely because the default type for any input is text. So people will at least still be able to enter some text. So it's not as nice as an optimal user experience, but you're really upgrading the client side. So you don't have a lot of JavaScript to write anymore. Imagine a date picker. So for example, here I have type equals tel, type equals email, type equals date, type equals color. Those are inputs that I already had in the normal form. I just add that one type to it, and out come, validation, like where error messages just, and by the way, all of these error messages, one of the big benefits you have is they're going to come pre-translated in all languages that your browser is already translated in. So a huge benefit. The other thing you get there in an email address is virtual keyboarding, right? So on a mobile device, you will get instantly the keyboard that you need to enter an email. And that's just handy, right? I wish they had one for Twitter with the hashtag. I would go like 3 levels deep. So type equals color gives you a native color picker. Type equals date gives you a native date picker. I mean, that saves you a lot of time, right? And again, they degrade gracefully to text. So then CSS3 is an area that you're going to be using for styling up your pages. You really want to move that into the CSS files. And CSS3 is sort of the next level, sort of like HTML4 and 5. There's CSS2 and 3. And there's almost 50, it's a modular, they've taken a very modular approach. It's something that we're starting to see also in HTML, because one of the big problems with like HTML5 is that it's like one giant spec, and it's sort of a take it or leave it. Like you have all of it implemented or you don't. And that model doesn't work very well for, then we maybe 10 years from now, we had this great period at the end of like 2009, 10, 11, and we don't want it to wait another 10 years to innovate in new areas. So you're starting to see things that look very much like browser-specific prefixes. You're starting to see those now in APIs for HTML, like JavaScript APIs as well, like Moz WebSocket or things like along those lines. And CSS has this concept already, has always had it, because browsers can pick up a module, one module at a time. So they can say, well, I want to do border radius, the rounded corners, or gradients, but I'm not going to tackle reflection yet. So they can pick that up, and until the spec is done, they can support that with their own prefixes, and finally they can roll that out to with the proper standard. So just a couple of examples. You can have some CSS code that, for example, when you hover over an image, creates that border radius of 10 pixels and gives that nice rounded corner. Again, how would you do that in the past, right? You would either have a completely new image, or you would have 4 rounded corner images that you would have to download as part of your page, additional script to run. So that's a great example of how simple HTML5 and CSS are, or CSS3. They make it just simpler to do things that you already probably were trying to do. So scaling, this is a WebKit transform. So I add the -WebKit there. That's for Chrome and Safari to say, okay, well, in that case, scale it. So when I hover over the image, it just gets a little bit bigger. And another example, one I like, is the linear gradient. So a linear gradient is so easy to put in now. You have a background image, you set it to a gradient that you built yourself. You just give it a color, top color and a bottom color. And by the way, I'm going to post these slides, so if you can't keep up with the all the code examples, just don't worry, I'm going to post them somewhere on SlideShare. And if you look at what had to be done in the past to do the same linear gradient, I mean, it's amazing, right? You have to pull in an image. In IE, you had to do all kinds of special hacks with different color codes and so on. So all very, very problematic. The new way is just say, I want a gradient. The browser, just do it for me. Many times it's much more optimized because you're not running code on top of your page. It's actually handed off right to the browser. Just do it for me. Multi-column layout, another great example. If you had to do this before, maybe you would parse the page, all the content, do a bunch of complex calculations of where the content would go, create a number of divs, slap it in there. That's a thing of the past. Now you just say WebKit column count or Moz column count 3 and hand it off to the browser. Just create 3 columns for me from this body of text. So great stuff there. Reflection, this is not in so many browsers yet, but you can kind of see where that's going. This will work even on videos. You play back a video in reflection. It's really some very cool stuff coming out in the CSS arena. Okay, the next area I want to talk about is the multimedia. So multimedia consists of, at this point, the new audio and video elements. These are elements in HTML5 that are kind of like an image element. You can embed video and audio with the same ease that you can plop a video or an image in your page. What's nice about that is they are really part of your page now. It's not like Flash with a separate execution content running on top of your page as a black box, but you can style it with CSS, you can control it with JavaScript, all with the same language, everything very, very easy. And the one downside of the current status of HTML5 audio and video is that there's the different browsers support different codecs. I'm not going to go into the complete details of that, but let's just say some browsers support MP4s and others OGG and WebM, H264 versus the more open source formats. And there's an easy way around that. So if you look at the code that you need to include a video element, the most basic one is just, video, controls. The controls gives you the control bar where you can click on play and the seek bar and the volume. And that's it, right? You point to your file. So that it's almost like an image. It's not a self-closing element, but you do need a closing video element. But if you look at the next one, you'll see that at the bottom I actually included 2 source elements. And by simply having two versions of the video, that's the downside, you can easily tell the browser, well, play the first one you can play, and then all the browsers today will be able to handle that. So that's a very good, good system. This is also where the track element goes, the one I mentioned in the accessibility section. Now, what you get then is a simple video, drops right into your page, and it's a part of the HTML5 page. So if you have CSS effects, they'll take place immediately as you hover over the video, they'll play. You can use JavaScript, right, just inline JavaScript, like this.play, things like that, that just can detect mouse movements and all kinds of clever things. And then there's a whole API to back this up. You can say, give me every 5 seconds, give me a frame, and put it in a canvas and do something crazy with it. So that's that. And to really fall back, even for browsers, like older browsers like IE that doesn't support video, you can still use an embedded final sort of triple fallback. So you have the WebM, MP4, and finally you have your Flash fallback. And that's a pretty well accepted thing. Most of old IE has a pretty high Flash penetration rate. And WebVTT, that is a simple standard by giving a text file with a specific format. Basically, here's my subtitles. You just link it directly to your page, to your video element. Not widely supported yet, but there's already some plugins or some JavaScript libraries that can help pull this in the meantime. All right, so graphics and 3D, the next feature area. That's another area that was a huge hole in the coverage of HTML in general. So there was not a graphics API. Now we have SVG support. So SVG is an XML-based language for graphics. That can now be natively part of HTML pages. So you can have a page that has an SVG element in it, and it just does it does everything that you would do in like a standalone SVG. So the kind of stuff that you would use Flash for or Silverlight. And Canvas, that's the real new HTML5 element that exposes a drawing API. It's more like a bitmap graphic. SVG is scalable vector graphics, by the way, and Canvas is more of a sort of a, you could think of it as a scriptable bitmap. So you have an area on the page, and you can write to it, you can draw things on it, you can create shapes, and of course then you start doing that in loops with the request animation frame and so on, and that basically just starts becoming very much alive, animation, pixel data, you have all of this power to do things. And Canvas actually supports a 2D mode and a 3D, the WebGL that you may have already seen examples of. And you can get full access to the mouse movement. So for example, in this example here, this one, so I can actually detect the mouse and change, so I have complete access to every pixel's RGB&A values in that canvas. So I can literally say, get the image data for the pixel that the mouse is on top of and change it to something else. So it's well, with a little bit of code, it's actually quite easy to do that. There's libraries, of course, higher level libraries that you can then pull in, like heatmap.js, which is great for just doing this. Like you plug in your live data from web server traffic and it overlays on top of a map. Canvas can sit on top of a canvas, Canvas sit on top of other elements. There's a lot of different things, and a lot of sessions today will no doubt focus heavily on the Canvas area. There's other things you can do. This one is a really good demo, and like I said, I'll post the slides. You can click on these links. Every time zone, basically just a Canvas animation of where you would be. Canvas demos, another great site. Definitely check that out. The amazing stuff people have done with Canvas, so worth checking. And then the 3D Canvas, people have built things like Quake games in the browser. There's a Google project for that. The body browser, all kinds of very, very cool stuff that's coming out. This is the sort of the WebGL. It's OpenGL ported to the browser. Sort of a direct competitor with like DirectX technologies, and that may have a really good uptake here pretty soon. So device access, that's another really, so now we're getting a little bit more in the sort of the bottom half of that earlier graphic, right, the more invisible parts. And device access, there's a lot of exciting things. And some of it's already completely done, like geolocation. Other things are not nearly ready yet, so there's things like speech input and device orientation and webcam, or the get user media with the access to your webcam. All those things are very promising. The model is now in place, I think, for a lot of these things. For example, in geolocation, you can go to a page. Let's see here. So I go to this geolocation page, and the browser will prompt me if I want to share my location with this site. And then, of course, the geolocation part, this is taking the geolocation data, the latitude and longitude of your location, and then overlaying that on a Google map using the Google Directions API. This gives me the exact directions to go back home. So that's pretty cool. It's right in your browser. The accelerometer support is pretty amazing. So here's accelerometer support. Basically, the Mac has a built-in, has a built-in accelerometer, basically to see, if you drop your Mac, it protects your hard drive from, it basically locks out your hard drive, but you can basically tap into that same accelerometer and detect movement. Of course, this works a lot better on a smaller tablet or something like that, on a mobile device. A lot of these device access items are very much, it makes more sense on a mobile device, like a camera access for scanning a barcode. Those are things you still need native applications for today, but that stuff is very rapidly starting to come into HTML5 as well. And let's see. This is a really cool one. The input, this is where you can see one of those HTML browser-specific prefixes, right? The experimental WebKit speech you can add to pages, like to input elements or text boxes. So if you go to the Google Translate, for example, here, you can use this here. So HTML5 is the best thing I've ever seen. Is it? Let's try it again. HTML5 rocks. Okay, it's not working. Try it out. It actually is a pretty cool demo. Let's see if this one works. HTML5 rocks. There. What I really like about this one, I'm really bummed that it doesn't work right now. So HTML5 rocks. It's not working right now. Try this out, and what's really cool is you can speak into it, and then it actually translates it on the fly, and then it speaks it back to you. So pretty awesome demo, but can't show it to you. That's proof that it did work at some point. All right. So the performance area is another one. Right now that has a feature called Web Workers. In general, and I hope you went to see Steve Sauter's talk on performance, basically all of those things that he's talking about are must. And I think HTML5 performance is a big deal because you're starting to add a lot of new features, so you have to be very mindful on performance in general. But there is one feature in HTML5 that specifically it's a JavaScript way, basically a way to run JavaScript in the background. So you can run a long-lasting calculation. It doesn't have to be, the classic example is always the prime number calculator. I think it's much more interesting for, let's say, banking applications that need to do a quick calculation that might take, or for games, I think it's becoming more popular, that you don't block the complete UI. That JavaScript is single-threaded, so if you need to run a 2-second calculation, your UI will be locked up for a while, for as long as that takes. And so it's not a substitute for poorly written code. It's just a way to sort of use threads in a browser. It's whether that's technically threads is another discussion. And there's another big area that HTML5 is bringing in a ton of new features, and that's the offline and storage area. So any application that's running in your desktop has an easy way to store data. And HTML never had that. I mean, the only thing you ever had was cookies, right? So there was not a lot of space that you didn't have a lot of space in a cookie to store things, and it wasn't a great way to persist data. And now there's actually two different things. There's a file cache where you can store whole files, CSS, JavaScript, HTML, and storage, like data storage. And we'll talk about both of them. So offline web applications, this is a feature that you might have heard about as application cache, is one I'm personally really excited about. It's a way to tag your site and say, this is an offline site. When it loads in the browser, instead of putting it in the regular browser cache, would simply put it in an application cache. So not just the page that you're on. And typically, you'll find you're on a page, it goes into the browser cache. So if you ever come back to that page, it may or may not be served from the cache. So that's a benefit if you visited that page. But if I go to a page that I haven't visited yet, and I'm offline, then for sure that page is not going to show up. And now with application cache, you can sort of say, this is my site. I'm going to pre-fetch, if you will, the entire site. And so the next time you go from page A to page B, it's already in the cache and you just load it super, super fast. So it's a performance gain on top of the nice fact that you can use the entire site offline, which is the main benefit. And to do that, you simply add an app cache file. It's a simple text file. You just list out all the files you want to have in your application. Again, there's some specific little things like the network and fallback sections. We're not going to go into the details, but you basically just create a list of all the files that are part of your app. And then you reference that file simply from the HTML element. So you give it manifest equals and then point to the file. It's that simple. Running a page like this in the browser will first load that page and then read that file and then load everything into the application cache. So the other part, and I mentioned how cookies were the only other way you could store data. Well, now you've got what has been termed cookies on steroids. So you have a lot of new data storage opportunities. You basically have like 4 APIs. There's session storage, local storage, WebSQL database, which is sort of on the way out, and then IndexedDB, which is sort of the new database storage. So these are simple text storage areas. So web storage contains session storage and local storage. These are ways to just push data like up to like 5 megabytes by default you have access to. You can push that into the browser's storage and rely on it later. So session storage is gone at the time you close the browser, but local storage actually persists. So you can put game data and write it directly to disk. If you're offline, maybe you can temporarily push things into local storage when you're back online, and you can detect that with a whole bunch of new HTML5 events. You can then update the server again. And so there's a lot of powerful things that happens. Then you have database storage. You have WebSQL database, IndexedDB. These are, in some cases, like relational databases where you can actually write like objects and binary data to. Like a whole blob of data can be written. The first ones, session and local, by the way, are text-based only. So they're key value pairs. They're very simple. Whereas the database, you can use transactions to have a more business-like application. So just another way that you have the storage area, you have the graphics, all of these things combined make for super powerful applications that are going to be on par with desktop applications. The final area is the connectivity in real time, and in that area there's also a whole bunch of new stuff, cross-document messaging to speak from, let's say, an iframe to a page, but that iframe can contain content from a completely different domain. XHR level 2, servers and events, WebSockets, the core standard is a part of the standard that allows you to share content across different origins. WebSocket really replaces Comet and reverse Ajax, hanging get, long polling, all of those kind of techniques. Basically, those were all fake ways of getting like real-time bidirectional data. And instead, now WebSockets gives you a new API and a new protocol that you can speak in the browser. Basically, the browser can now open a TCP socket with either text or binary data in it and connect to backend message brokers or databases or anything that needs bi-directional communication, like chat is a perfect example of it. Game messaging, game infrastructure messaging is another great example. So you have that full power, in fact, the full power of sockets, but over port 80, so you don't have to open a separate port on the firewall, which is a big, big deal in some cases. Kind of examples you can build with that. Let's see here. The kind of demos you can build with it are, like this is an example of another feature, the drag and drop feature, right? That's here. On the bottom there is, on the middle, sorry, is the charting. The charting is done in HTML5 Canvas. And this data, this fast-moving data you see here, is actually WebSocket-based data that's coming from a message broker in a backend. So all of these things combined really make for powerful applications. And so to wrap up with the final section, what do you practically need to have in your tool belt to create these kind of applications, right? It looks good, but what do you need? And so the first thing is take another look at your browser development tools. If you haven't looked at these lately, then you really owe it to yourself to take another look at it, right? The kind of tools that are built in for example, the Chrome developer tools, my personal favorite, is there's all these shortcuts you can turn them on, right? So there's all these cool things like, you can figure out where exactly parts of the page are and style them up. You can do inline styling. You can actually play around with all of the CSS. You can actually, this has a feature in CSS in the Resources tab where you can look at the CSS and literally save it in the browser. So it actually has like a little Subversion repository that keeps all of the different things. It has ways to look at the network traffic, look at debugging your scripts, add-ons like page speed that you need to run for performance. It's just an incredible amount of tool sets, application cache and data views and scripts that is normally like this is that sort of minified script. You can actually look at it in a pretty print view like this, so you can have a much easier way to debug through even minified code. And the other thing is boilerplate. So before, there were a whole bunch of things that people needed as ways to add things to their pages, but boilerplate gives you a great starting point. If you need to start a new project, just use boilerplate. Just download it. It's written by Paul Irish and a few other people. Great resource that has basically everything you need. You get a complete library, a complete starter package with CSS, JavaScript, everything sort of handled the right way. And there's a lot of things that won't work in browsers, and just a few minutes to wrap it up here. So the boilerplate template doesn't give you that, but there's a whole list of what are called polyfills or emulation features. So you might say, well, I need the details element. I'll use it natively, but I'll use a jQuery details element polyfill. So and I can detect that using, which is also built into Modernizer. I can detect that with the Modernizer library, which is part of boilerplate. And you can build Modernizer. So Modernizer as a whole comes with HTML5 boilerplate. And it comes with a load script. So you can actually run tests to see whether a feature is supported or not, and then build your emulation around that. But you can also go to the Modernizer site now, and that's really cool. You can just pick the features you're interested in and build a custom version of Modernizer. And by the way, the creator of Modernizer will be at the HTML5 user group this Thursday. So check out the videos for that after. And Chrome Frame is another way you can tell people, here, just in your old version of IE, just embed the entire Chrome browser, and then we can use WebKit from there on. So that's really cool. A couple of free tools like PageSpeed, YSlow, and Speed Tracer. Great tools that are free. If you're not using them, why not, right? And I'm sure you've heard from Steve about that. Great tools that just just they run in 10 seconds, give you a complete report card, and that's it. So I know we're coming up on the time here, so like I said, I'll be around. I'll post the slides on SlideShare. I will stick around. We'll probably have to make way, but I'll be in the Kaazing booth for any questions you might have. Also, pretty easy to find on Twitter, LinkedIn, and if you want, my book is it's called Pro HTML5 Programming. With this coupon, you can get 50% off the ebook. That's has a lot more details on all the different APIs. And a couple more things I put in here, and that's it. So, I mean,